the committee, the Senate will get together and say, hey, you know, this person is unqualified, so give us money, and so money is given to them. And they say, you know, the hearings are so fun. They ask you to come in for a hearing, you come in, they say, take a bow and go. You know, that's Nigeria. Take a bow. You are a prominent and worthy and respected Nigerian. Just take a bow and move on. That's what happens in Nigeria. So the government, as it was making a case for remove, and in the past, by the way, the government will impose or will remove, under Obasanjo, will remove fuel subsidy. The labor will call a strike. Then the government will go to a court. The judges are corrupt. Give a judge money to issue an injunction stopping labor from proceeding on the strike. And labor leaders who are corrupt, who consult with those in power, will say, okay, our hands are tied. A court has asked us not to strike. So they'll suspend the strike and throw the workers underneath the bus. This time around, the egregiousness of this terrible policy, and at a time when a week before, on Christmas Day, Boko Haram had thrown a bomb at people who were coming out of the church and killed 100 and something people. It took 24 hours. The Nigerian president, by the way, was holding a party, Christmas Day party, and he was informed that a bomb had gone off at a church and people had died. And that was not enough to interrupt his party. He continued dancing, he and his vice president and his friends. It took 24 hours for him to go visit the site. And of course, they issued the same tired statement that they've issued for 50 years, which is, you know, the government will find out who did this, the person will be dealt with. And of course, everybody has learned that this is just a joke. The government doesn't even try. The police, even if the government wanted to try, the police is so incompetent, so inept, that they won't know how to do it, go about finding out who did this. And so, a week after all of this happened, the presidency announced that it had absolutely removed fuel subsidy, and that fuel, which was 65 naira per litre, was now going to sell for 141 naira per litre. And this was a predicament. A lot of people had paid to go home for Christmas, say from Lagos to my part of the country in the southeast. The transport fare was 3,000 naira per person. Some people travel with their families. Suddenly, the same distance, transporters were asking for 10,000 naira. So people went home for Christmas and they couldn't make it home, because the government had given the disinformation that if they were going to remove subsidies, but it will happen in April. But they wanted to deflect the attention of the Nigerian people, so they will surprise them. January 1. So the strike started. That is the strategy of the government. They got a high court judge to say the strike is illegal. This time around, Labour said, hell no, we're going to continue the strike. We'll ignore the court ruling. Of course, Nigerians started as a strike call by workers on that terrible force of guns and of soldiers and of police. And of course, people lost their lives in this struggle. But for the first time, the Nigerian government saw 1 million people come out in Lagos to protest. What they did was quickly, they got Labour back into the room, and sadly, the leadership of labor unions in Nigeria are often compromised. When the strike started, the protests, it was about reducing the price of fuel, reverting to the price of 65 naira per litre. But very soon, some of us began to say that we should enlarge the agitation and the cause. That we should force Nigeria, the Nigerian leadership, to cut down drastically on the resources, the amount of resources of the Nigerian people that it consumes. We insisted, some of us, that they should remove what they call constituency allowance, they should remove security vote, that the government should prosecute those of their friends who had collected illicit payments on fuel subsidy. That the Nigerian Constitution has an immunity clause, just like the American. The American Constitution gives you immunity only to the extent of your legitimate actions, if you like, the legitimate exercise of. But in Nigeria, a governor or a president could commit crimes and nobody would disturb him. So Nigerians were somewhat amazed that Blagojevich, the governor of Illinois, was shackled by the FBI. He hasn't even collected any money to begin with. But even if he collected, even if it took $50 million for somebody to sell that seat, they'll say he is the governor. We can't prosecute him until he's done serving as governor. So our immunity clause covers even criminal acts. So some of us wanted to fight to cover all of those, for the first time really, to achieve a Nigeria that is attentive to the needs of the Nigerian people. Somebody has said, a lot of Nigerians have argued, that Nigeria has enough resources to meet the needs of its citizens and to create a truly human space in the country. Unfortunately, the greed of a few, stands in the way. There's a former Nigerian governor, James Ibori, who is today sitting in a jail in England. James Ibori was governor of Delta State, which is an oil-producing state, for 8 years, 2 terms. At the end of those 2 terms, James Ibori has stolen 75% of the resources that accrued to his state in his time as governor. James Ibori was one of the most gallanted, praised, feed governors in Nigeria. He was tried, again, kangaroo trial, by the Nigerian government, following just great pressure from people within his state and outside. But he was allowed to choose his own judge, and he gave his judge some money. And there were 170 counts, at the end of which the judge said, oh, you know, there's not one count of corruption against you. So he was released. Meanwhile, his mistress, his wife, his sister have been arrested in England because much of the money he stole was processed through British banks. And so they were caught for money laundering, convicted, with a former attorney of his, a British lawyer. And the lawyer was sentenced to 8 years. His wife, mistress, and sister are serving 5 years each. So meanwhile, Ibori was gallivanting in Nigeria. And it was due to a personal quarrel with Jonathan, the current president, that Jonathan then sought to try him again in Nigeria. He went underground. The next thing was he showed up in Dubai. Bad move, because Dubai happens to have an extradition treaty with the UK. So UK authorities found out he was in Dubai and got him arrested. And after hearings, extradition hearings, he was flown to London last year. And Ibori is awaiting trial. Now, to sort of give you a sense of the ingenious ways in which Nigerian officials steal, Ibori, when he was governor, had an open tender system. But there were 3 companies that got all the contracts that were awarded by his government. All 3 companies had his mistress as their director, as the owner. So the government would advertise a contract. These 3 companies and others would bid, and invariably these 3 companies got it. So each one was Ibori's company, with his girlfriend serving as his front. So he could say to you, you know, the companies won in an open bid. So his girlfriend would then take the money out to England and then pay it into his accounts and use it to buy him a private jet, use it to, you know, take care of his family and so on. And that's how his wife, his girlfriend, his sister were roped into money laundering charges in the UK. So, unsatisfactory manner for all of us. The government, after a while, seeing the growing turnout of protesters on the street, seeing that it was close to being forced to make real changes in the country, called labor leaders, who knows what kind of deal was brokered with them, but came down, reduced the cost of fuel per liter to 97 from 141. The labor leaders said they were satisfied and they called off the strike. The people on the street who had taken over the strike were willing to go ahead. But then there was these series of bombings in Kano. Some people think perhaps the government set up those bombings, it's unconfirmed, to use that as a pretext to shut down the protests elsewhere in the country. But whatever the case, the Nigerian people had served notice that they know the name of their enemy, that they know the nature of the crimes that are being committed against them. And all of us expect that there will be a next round. But in this next round, labor leaders who are liable to being compromised will not be at the head of it. And so perhaps the Nigerian people will have the great opportunity to reclaim their country. So I'm going to stop here and sort of take questions. Thank you very much. Yes.
So you were describing the subsidies, or what are called the subsidies on imported oil for the Nigerian people. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, to the extent that Nigeria is a big exporter of oil, where does that oil come from, or who has access to that?
Okay, good. Well, Nigeria's oil is the hub of the oil producing is in the Niger Delta. So one of the, of course, this is, we could spend, if we had like 5 hours to spend, maybe I'll touch the tip of the iceberg finally. So I haven't even touched it, per se. But President Jonathan is from the oil producing hub of the country. Okay? And about 6 years ago, the oil that is produced used to be kept, most of it used to be kept to the center, in the center, still is, the center still, the federal government still keeps most of the oil funds, proceeds from the oil funds. Of course, it's the international, multinational oil corporations, Shell, Chevron, Texaco and so on, that do this export, and they pay a commission really to the Nigerian government. So that commission is, much of it is kept by the Nigerian government, and it used to be that every state got a share based on its population. But then, the oil producing hub of the country is the most economically depressed part of Nigeria. It is like a war zone. The levels of poverty are mind-boggling. And so, which is why Kensari Wiwa, the activist, environmental activist, began to speak for the rights of his people, the oil-producing people, to keep the resources from the oil in their state. And of course, Shell, in collusion with the Nigerian government, got him tried with 8 other Ogoni activists and had them hanged, okay, to serve as a lesson. But in the aftermath of that, the struggle ultimately led to